Ornamental grasses. The reason we kind of chose this in the fall is now is the time to be seeing these ornamental grasses starting to reach their peak. You know, they've had all summer to grow vegetatively. They're green, they're upright, they're looking beautiful. Some of them haven't even set their seed heads yet. That's coming quickly, and then they're beautiful. You know, they're beautiful all summer, but now they're kind of at their peak. So this is a great time to talk about them, a great time to know, and if you're looking for things in your landscape, we're approaching a good time to plant them and divide them. So we'll focus on a lot of different things today. Hopefully this will be interesting as well as educational for you. So the interesting thing with grasses is they are found all over the world. If you would look around, you're going to notice that grasses are they just dominate everywhere, even on highway cuts, you know, and a lot of those are planted intentionally, of course, but there are so many types of grasses, and they're found in every environment: high mountains, deserts, bogs, wetlands, prairies, the jungles, grasses and grass relatives underwater. Grasses thrive in every kind of environment all over the planet. And so naturally, these are plants that are great for landscape settings if you choose the right one for the right climate condition and so forth. So that's what we're going to focus on, is some of those that work great for our climate and great for landscapes that aren't going to spread, they aren't going to get out of control, they're not going to self-seed and become a giant weed and monster for you, but they're going to be part of your landscape, and they look great, they're easy to care for, fairly low, you know, problems, very low pest problems, all of those things. So for this class, the focus is going to be on those that are cold hardy enough for our climate here along the Wasatch Front, some even on the Wasatch Back. They're water efficient, so I'm not going to show you a lot of grasses that are going to be growing in bogs and swamps. That's just not part of what we're doing here. And they look great in areas along the Wasatch Front. So here on this slide, I'm not going to go through each of these names now because we're going to go through each of these as we go. But this is a list of the main, you know, genus of these groups of grasses: the Miscanthus group, the Calamagrostis group, and so on. So we'll talk about each of these to some extent, show you some pictures. And I'm going to also mention that the range and size of grasses can pretty much fit in any landscape. So whatever size of grass that you think you need or want, there is one that will fit that size for our climate. I've got a few pictures here that kind of show the extent of that. The little teeny fescue, blue fescues that are a few inches tall, to the Ravenna grass that can be, you know, 15 feet tall, 12 to 15 here in our climate. And so if there's a space in your yard, you're thinking, oh, I need something that's 2 feet tall or 3 feet tall or 5 feet tall, you could find a grass that fits that space. And granted, they're not always that tall. They grow that tall every single year because the vegetation, they die back, you cut them back. But these are great plants, very versatile, quite a range. And I notice I say excluding bamboos. I'll mention a couple things about bamboo here in a minute, but we're not going to spend a lot of time with those. So we're going to group grasses into a couple different categories here. And this doesn't seem logical necessarily to a lot of people, or you know, even to the casual observer. You're not going to know which grass is an evergreen versus which is non-evergreen, because they all look green. And in the wintertime, without seeing them in the winter, most of the time you think all of these are all the vegetative parts of these just die and turn brown. But there are a handful that are evergreen, what that means is that their growth cycle is a little different. So the evergreen varieties, they look great right from the beginning in the spring. They don't actually completely die back. The vegetative part of that grass die back through the winter. So some of that grass material is still actually colored. It has, some of these are more of the blue-green shades, like blue oak grass and the blue fescues and some of those, but they're evergreen. And so right from the very beginning of spring, they actually look great, and they're about the size that they normally would be, because you don't cut those all the way back. You can cut them a little, you can trim them up and make them look nice, clean them up. But these are grasses you don't cut down every year, versus the non-evergreen type. The vegetative part of that grass dies back to the ground. It turns brown, it's dead. And so you would cut it off to the ground every single year, and it needs to regrow from the crown every single year and put on that new foliage. And so that's the difference between an evergreen and a non-evergreen. And really, for the sake of this presentation, your blue oak grasses and your fescues, and a few of the like the reed grasses, they're kind of in that evergreen category because there's a little bit of green that stays in there all winter long. The top seed heads need to be cut down to keep it looking good. But your Karl Forester, your avalanche, your overdam reed grasses could kind of fit into that evergreen category. They don't need to be cut completely to the ground. There's some green in there all year. Everything I'm going to talk about is hardy to zone 5 and some to zone 4. If you happen to live up in the Park City, Summit County areas or other areas where you might get into the zone 3s, not all of these grasses are going to be great for that location, but you can do a little homework and figure out which ones will. There are grasses that do work for those elevations as well. And I will mention most grasses prefer full sun. Of the decorative grasses, there are very few that thrive in the shade. They may grow in the shade, but they're not going to thrive and do their best in the shade. So why should we use ornamental grasses? This is just a simple question of just, why are we going to use these? They're not colorful. Most people think of landscape stuff and they're thinking of color and certain types of interest, but this list provides kind of that basic reasoning for why you choose ornamental grasses. Number one is they're very little care, once a year type cleanup for those that that need cut back. Most of them are very drought tolerant, so they have a wide range of tolerance and conditions of soils and so forth. Late summer and early winter, they have great form, great color. They add an interest to the landscape. They also create a movement in the landscape. The taller ones, that you get a little wind or you get there's movement in a landscape, which some people don't think about, but can be very, create that aesthetic appeal, the feel. And anyway, just for being a landscape in a certain field, grasses can help create a feel. They're disease and pest free. Very few issues or problems with ornamental grasses, even compared to your lawn grasses. Lawn grasses have a lot of pests and grubs and issues. Ornamental grasses don't have those same pests. The natural look of them, they're great looking, nice structure again. They live a long time. They're easy to divide and easy to share, I guess, with neighbors or whatever. So very easy plant. And like I mentioned already, the size, you can find a grass that fits the size you need. Now, I'm going to get into some pictures here in just a minute. I know there's a lot of text right here at the beginning, but these are very important things to know right off the bat. And then as we get going and showing you some slides and pictures, I'll kind of get into some details of the specific types of grasses. So maintenance for most of these, as I mentioned, with the exception of evergreen grasses, it's once a year you cut it back. Now notice the picture in this slide, there's stubble. Now, I don't know where the kind of the cultural practices for this kind of stuff comes from. You don't need to leave any stubble when you cut these back. You should try to get as close to the ground as you can get on the dead material. Leaving 3 inches of dead stubble does nothing for this grass. It's dead material. And sometimes I've seen these cut back and there's 6 inches of dead stubble there. It's all dead vegetative material. So when you're cutting these down, they need to be cut clear to the ground, and just take that dead stuff off. The new vegetation, the new growth is going to come from the crown of the plant, which is usually just down, just barely below the soil. So the evergreen or semi-evergreen types, they can be cut back like half to a third down into the foliage, and then you just rake it. Take a rake, a stiff something, and rake through it, pulls the dead out, but then the living parts of that, like I said, they stay green all year. And so non-evergreen varieties, I've already said that, cut to the ground. You can do this in the spring or the fall when you have time. In the fall, everything is still upright. Sometimes in the spring, heavy snows have flattened that. And so it creates a little different challenge when you're cutting grasses, but there's no magic as far as when to do it. It's kind of when you have time. And if there's, if there's snow early or snow late, sometimes that changes things. Sometimes you like to leave them up for the early parts of winter. Birds will sometimes come and eat the little seeds. Birds will sometimes come and take some of that for nesting materials and different things. It just depends on time of year and different things that are going on, but it's completely up to you when you cut them down. Some of these grasses do grow. They're not aggressive in spreading, although the clump size increases as it grows over the years. So over time, every few years, 4 to 5 years, maybe it's longer for you, you would want to consider dividing those. When you see a dead center, that's a pretty good indication that it's time to divide that clump. And to divide it, you just simply dig it up, cut it up into pieces, take some chunks off of it, put yours back in the ground, and either dispose of the others or share them with friends. Very little fertilizer. If you fertilize them, they will grow faster and more, but you don't necessarily need that. And in some cases, you probably don't want that. If it grows too much, it'll get heavy and kind of tend to flop open on some of the more upright varieties. So be careful with fertilization on these. Although a little fertilizer, a little bit of nitrogen, depending on your soils, if they're lacking, could help these. Like in the case of our garden here, I think ours lack a little bit of nutrient just because the soil that was brought in at the time of construction. Water according to soil type. For the most part, these are very drought tolerant. Once a week type watering. If you water a deeper watering less frequently, they're going to be better. Some of these grasses, just this year, we had a little irrigation challenge, and there was a portion on top of a water tank. We thought it was getting water. It was not getting any water. It didn't get any supplemental irrigation until just a couple weeks ago. And the grasses, they were stunted. They didn't grow as much, but they did not die. We've since watered them. They're since, looking fine. The growth rate was, of course, slowed. They're very short compared to what they might normally be. So these are very low water, very tolerant and tough plants. So we're going to jump right into the varieties now. All right, so Miscanthus varieties. This is a genus of about 15 species of perennial grasses, perennial meaning they'll continue to come back year after year. They're the most common for Utah landscapes as far as the large grasses. They do need room to grow, and they need divided after a period of time. We've got a lot of these Miscanthus grasses in our garden here. So now I'm going to go through several of these Miscanthus varieties that are common that you may be familiar with or you may not be familiar with, that you may consider if you're considering a large grass. I've got a couple of these in my yard, and they are 6 feet tall right now, and they haven't even put on their seed heads yet. That'll be a couple feet above the foliage. So in the slide, I put up to 6 feet tall. Depends. The factors. Sometimes these may only grow 4 feet tall. It depends on how much you water and how much you fertilize, or how the nutrients of the soil or sites. But they're just big grasses. So the seeds had emerged late in the fall. Like I said, they're probably going to start popping out seed heads anytime now. And because of our shortened season, the seeds usually don't have enough time to mature. So therefore, you don't have problems with these reseeding and becoming weeds. If we had a really extended growing season, you might get a few seeds that mature and might get a few that self-propagate and start growing little starts. But I think that's pretty rare for these kind of grasses here in our climate. These can be cut to the ground when they're dormant. So now I'm going to go through some specific ones. Maiden grass, or cosmopolitan maiden grass. Now, sometimes you'll hear Miscanthus just called maiden grass. There's a specific variety of Miscanthus. It's called maiden. It has the maiden grass name. This one is Miscanthus cosmopolitan. It's got a wider blade. Notice the little bit of variegation. The color differences in there are really light stripe compared to the wide foliage. And nice. It's just a big grass, nice grass, big wide blades. It's all personal preference on the looks. I like all of these. I like the grasses. They just have a unique look, a unique texture, a feel that adds to any landscape. So cosmopolitan is a great one. Now, some of these I've taken pictures of the signs. These are older pictures of the signs that go with the picture. So this one's zebra grass. This is here in our garden. Most of these are here in our garden. And in our garden, like I mentioned, some of these are a little bit stunted. And it might be that we're not watering enough, or that the soil is poor with lack of nutrient, and we haven't fertilized much at all. So anyway, some of these in a different setting, you might think, well, I've seen that before and it looked a lot different than that. Well, ours are going to be a little shorter in some cases, but zebra grass, It's a Miscanthus. It's going to be big. It kind of tends to droop just a little, as opposed to one that looks very, very similar to it in the striping. It's got little stripes across the blades going up. Porcupine grass, and I don't think I have a picture of porcupine. Porcupine tends to remain a little more upright, just kind of headed straight up, where zebra grass does tend to droop and fountain just a little bit. Here's Morning Lights Miscanthus. It has a much finer textured blade. Still, you're getting a little bit of variation on the color, so there's a little bit of striping on the blades, but a much finer leaf size. This one doesn't get nearly as tall. I think this one's more like a 4-foot tall type grass than the seed heads above it. Nice looking grass. It, you know, all the Miscanthus are big. I've already said that a bunch. But this is not as big as some of the others that have the broader blades, the broader foliage. So here's a picture of maiden grass, or Miscanthus graciella. Not a lot of variation in here. It's just the green foliage, but this is at the time when the seed heads are on. Now most of the Miscanthus grasses have a seed head that looks similar to this picture. They kind of open up, almost, not like a cornstalk tassel, but kind of similar, where they're not just very narrow anything. They open up, they're big, they're fluffy, they're beautiful. When some of them have a little bit more of a silver look to them as opposed to just tan or whitish. But Graciella, another variety. This is a picture of it after the seed heads are on. And notice the gazebo in the background here is a standard height. It's a tall thing. So with the seed heads on these, they're probably approaching, well, they're between 6 and 7 feet in this particular photo. Here's one called Maiden Grass Bluten Wonder. I don't have a lot of very detailed specifics on every single one of these varieties, but I wanted to show you that there are a lot of varieties. A lot of different names, and each one has a little slight different characteristic to it, which makes it unique in its specific variety. But all the Miscanthus look generally the same type of form, same type of height, same type of seed head. Here's back to the Cosmopolitan I already showed you, but a little bit closer picture of the variation, the striped blades. Here's Border Bandit and Morning Lights just surrounding this little concrete display. Now, this is a little earlier in the season before the seed heads come on, but these, same thing, they get tall, they get big, very, very nice for kind of a screen. If you don't need the screen all year, but you're kind of trying to create some sort of a little barrier later in the season, the grasses can do that because they just form a nice thick wall, and then it's cut down, and then something else can take its place in the spring. Maiden grass, as I mentioned, a little bit finer texture. Here's a picture of maiden grass as it's with its seed head. A little bit different color seed head, but very, again, similar. Here's maiden grass, or what's referred to as maiden hair grass before the seed head. A little thinner texture than some. You'll see that. I'm about done with Miscanthus here because we're just showing you kind of the same things, but I wanted you to see several examples. And then this one, it shows zebra grass with the stripes going across the blade instead of parallel with the blade. So zebra grass, it creates just a different look. It's a different kind of striping and so forth. Zebra grass is nice. I have a couple of these in my yard and I like them. Here's another picture of zebra grass. I think actually the picture on the left is actually porcupine grass. They look very, very similar, but one is much more upright and one droops a little bit. Here's variegated Miscanthus, variegatus. Looks a lot like Cosmopolitan, but is actually even lighter. So it has a bit more variegation. Instead of one light stripe down the middle, you're probably having one dark stripe down the middle with lighter striping throughout the rest of the blade. Quite attractive, can fit in a lot of different settings with a lot of plant combinations. Just another zebra grass, another upright, looks like maiden grass. And I wanted to show you a couple winter pictures. So these are Miscanthus grasses in the winter. Notice how they've gone completely brown, straw brown. The seed heads are brown, the foliage is brown. Here's a picture of other types of grasses mixed in, but this is what you expect in the off-season months. This may be before snow falls, or this could have been maybe after a light. If we didn't have a lot of snow that year, they're not flattened down. But this is the kind of stuff. All of these are considered non-evergreen grasses that you see here, and they would be cut completely to the ground. All right, so if you have some questions with Miscanthus, post them, and Janice can be addressing those, or I'll come back around, but I don't want to stop in the middle, and so we're just going to keep going. So the Calamagrostis, these are the reed grasses. All right, reed grasses, there's a whole bunch of species of these, 260 of these, temperate regions of the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. Here in our area, it's the variety acutiflora, and then there's some specific cultivations. Karl Forester, Avalanche Overdam, or Eldorado. Those are the ones you're going to find in the nurseries here for this grass. Of the 260, you're going to just pretty much deal with 4. And some nurseries may only carry 1 or 2, because Avalanche Overdam and Eldorado, they're very, very similar. And if you're not an expert and you don't know specifically what you're looking for, you may not even tell the difference in those. So here's some pictures of these. This is Karl Forester. This is here in our garden in the landscape setting. You see a lot of these everywhere. Typical, they're upright, nice golden brown. The seed heads are tight. The very, very bottom of the plant, the foliage plant can have the foliage leaf out a little bit. Everything else is actually part of the seed head going up. And so the foliage itself on these plants is usually only a foot high, maybe a foot to 18 inches, and then the seed heads come up. Karl Forester can get kind of tall. I've seen Karl Forester grasses as high as 6 feet, 5 to 6 feet tall with the full seed head. That's, when they're completely blooming like this. Some of the others, Eldorado, Avalanche, some of those, you're kind of looking at a 3 feet to 4 foot tall height once the seed heads are on and everything. And you see these around, very common. Here's one Overdam. And notice between these two, you don't see a lot of differences. Similar look, similar, feel to them. That's why in some cases, you don't necessarily need to be too particular, other than knowing that Karl Forester may get taller than the other cultivations. All right, here's Eldorado. Now, Eldorado and Avalanche do have some variegation to them. If the foliage, they have a little bit of light striping. And so if that is an appeal before the seed heads come on to have a little different look, a little bit of that striping, you'd want to look for those 2 varieties. The clump size on these, just like these pictures, kind of a 1 foot, little, maybe 18 inches out, 18 inches tall. If they get taller than that and start dying in the middle, again, it's time to be divided. You dig them up, you cut them up, and they just take off again. So here's Avalanche. Notice Eldorado and Avalanche, again, look very, very similar. It's hard to tell them apart unless you're really looking and close. So that's kind of the extent of the Calamagrostis grasses as far as what I've got. Pictures and description there's just a few of them. They all look generally the same. The only difference is height. If you're looking for something more upright and taller, Karl Forester. Otherwise, all the rest are the same. Now, to go along with the Calamagrostis, this is not Calamagrostis, Korean feather reed grass. Well, I take it back. It is. It's part of that family, but I put it by itself, Korean feather reed grass, because it looks completely different, and the foliage, everything. So notice the seed heads get fluffier. They're a lot softer texture. They open up a little bit, and the foliage of the plant actually fountains a little bit. And the foliage of this plant can be 3 feet tall. I really like this one. This is just a very attractive looking grass. It's perennial. It has a little bit of the pinkish, purplish color in the seed heads compared to the dark green foliage. So this is, as far as one of the Calamagrostis grasses, this one is one of my favorites, just because it has a unique look, a unique feel, and it's just very attractive. So I threw a couple pictures of that in there just to kind of give you a perspective of what that looks like. But a great choice for something that with seed heads on it, 3.5 feet tall, broad, spread 3.5 feet wide. That's with the foliage. The clump itself is smaller than that. Anyway, great choice. Now let's move to the Panicum or switchgrasses. So the switchgrasses are a lot like Miscanthus in that they're big. They are large grasses, but the seed head has a very soft texture to it. Notice in this picture, the seed heads are on, but you can see through them. They're not very dense. It's very light, very wispy. I don't know how else to describe them, but they're just very soft textured, but the plant itself can still be very tall. There's quite a bit more color variation with the Panicum or switchgrasses. You can have a little bit of red tinting in the foliage. You can have some light blue, blue or kind of blue-green. So there's some good options with these. They do tend to grow fairly upright. Not a lot of drooping with them. So this one right here is called red switchgrass, and if you'll notice from the picture, it does have red in the foliage, and the seed heads have a tint of red to them as well. This particular variety is Prairie Fire. There's a couple of red switchgrasses with very specific cultivations, but a nice choice. I'd say 4 feet tall in the foliage. Seed heads get a little bit above that. So a range, even with seed heads, some of them, again, depending on the fertilization, watering, so forth, the foliage could be a little shorter with seed heads above it of 1.5 feet. So a range from 3.5 to 5 feet tall. Shenandoah switchgrass, notice it's a little broader texture, but just dark green. The seed heads are just coming on this picture here. You can almost hardly see them, but they're in there. Here's a north wind, very tight, a little tighter than some of the others as far as the growth habit, just nice and tight together. Soft seed heads. Oops, I'm going backwards here. Dallas Blues. Now Dallas Blues, this picture is a little hard to tell, but it does have a bluish tint to it. A lot more so than many of the others. Comparing, if you had some of these just side by side, you would really notice the blue coloring in the Dallas Blues. And this one's tall. We had these, some of these got taken out with some construction for our new building. But these 5 feet tall with seed heads on them. Let's see, here's another picture of Shenandoah. Notice the burgundy, kind of burgundy foliage in there. Heavy metal switchgrass is 3 to 4 feet tall, kind of a reddish tint seed head, thicker blade than some of the other switchgrasses. Notice in the picture there's one that's winter, very sparse, and one that's full. If you get several of these together, they're quite thick. Like you said, they form a barrier. They form kind of a natural break. You could make mazes out of these, I guess, if you want to do something like that in your yard. Same with the Miscanthus. They're big, but these just have a different, softer texture to them. Here's another picture of Dallas Blues. It's hard on these pictures to see the blue come out, but the blue is really there. So that's the switchgrasses. I'm going to move on to Pennisetums now. So if you have questions about switchgrasses, I've showed you some of the main ones. Now, realistically, there are, in our garden, I think we've lost a few with construction, but we have about 60, I want to say between 60 and 65 different ornamental grasses growing right here in our garden that have been very successful. And a lot of the pictures I've showed you are those grasses that are here. So there's quite a variety. Now, that doesn't mean all of these will be available in the current nursery trade, but if you are interested in them, you can usually find them. Or you find somebody that has one and you ask them if you can dig off a little chunk of it and start it in your own yard, and it works just great. So we'll move on to Pennisetum. These are the fountain grasses. Now, these are also quite common. You see these around. There's quite a few different varieties of these, and they are very attractive. The picture here that I'm showing here, notice kind of that bottle brush little seed head on them. Very kind of rounded, Nice shapes. This one that I show here is actually referred to as hammelm. That's the variety of this one. And I'll get into some specifics. I'll show you another one of these. But the fountain grasses, they are what, that's the description. They kind of tend to have a little bit of a fountain look. Start at the bottom, kind of shoot out, firework fountains and all those things. They kind of have that unique look to them with a little bit of a bottle brush seed head to them. This one here happens to be Cassian's Choice, and I'll show you some more of these as we go. So now I'll get into the names of these. Black fountain grass, nice green foliage. It gets its black fountain grass from the seed heads on this one. This one happens to be Moundry, and this, as the seed heads come out, they have a dark color to them. They're not black, but they have a darker color to them, and so that darker color contrasting with the green, it's got its name as black fountain grass. This one's Moundry is the specific cultivation. Here's another one of Cassian's Choice, fountain grass. Now these are all Pennisetum is the genus. These grasses get about, with the seed heads all on, kind of at maturity. This picture right here, this grass is about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, and wide. They can get decent size, but not overwhelming. But you would want to make sure and have at least enough room, a couple feet, 2 feet diameter by 2 feet tall, plus a little bit of room for seed heads on those. So let's see, my controls are hiding my picture here. Okay, this is the hammelm, kind of what I showed you in the beginning. So this one's a little bit smaller compared to Cassian's Choice. The hammelm will be 18 inches or so, kind of a roundish shape. Unique, very upright, very erect, bottle brush type seed heads on these. A lot of times you see these in commercial plantings. You see them in residential plantings as well, but they're used a lot just because you can put these in mass. They look good. They're easy to care for, like I described in the beginning. So it's just a great choice for landscapes. What happened here? Here we go. Now here's one. The picture quality on this isn't great. Carly Rose fountain grass. Now this one's, we got these in the garden. They do great. I've got a couple of these in my yard. They've done great. The foliage on these is it's fountained. Yeah, the foliage can be about 2.5 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide, and then the seed heads on top of that. So the ones in my yard are about 3 feet tall. Actually, a couple here in the garden, right at the front entrance of our administration building, also about 3 feet tall, 3 feet wide. But notice the kind of the pinkish, the different colored seed heads. Some have a pinkish tint to them, some have kind of that tan, and that just the contrasting with the green, very attractive look when those seed heads are on. And most of the fountain grasses, the seed heads are on much earlier in the season compared to the bigger grasses, and those seed heads just stay there all summer long. From once they form, they're on for the rest of the summer. And like I said, they're not really maturing, they're not starting new plants. They're just decorative, and so they make a nice look. So I'm gonna shift from then the fountain grasses. I think, yeah, I am. Yeah, there's, now before I leave fountain grasses, I didn't show you all of them. There's some really small varieties. There's one called Little Bunny and Little Honey, and so there's some that are only a foot tall. They're meant for very small spaces. Similar look though, they've got the bottle brush type seed head. So if you're looking for a fountain grass that's small, there are cultivations and varieties that are small that will fit those spaces for you. And you can find them, just ask at the nurseries for the small. And they're little cultivation names. Like I mentioned, Little Bunny, Little Honey, there's another Little something. But there's a lot of the fountain grasses. Now, at the very end, I think I have a picture about purple fountain grass. I think it's a good time here. I'm not showing it right in front of you. Purple fountain grass that you see that's just really purple throughout, very nice look. Most of the time you see it in annual beds or containers. That grass is an annual in our climate. It's cold hardy to like zone 9 or 8. And so in our climate, of course, it just can't survive the winters. Even if you pull it inside a garage or something, it's just usually not going to survive. So it's grown as an annual here, but it's beautiful. Deep colors, you know, nice shape, same type of fountainy look and the seed heads on it. But if you're wondering about that purple fountain grass, it has to be grown as an annual. All the ones I'm talking about are perennial grasses. They are hardy to our climate. They just continue to come back year after year. So moving on to Halictotrichon, this is the blue oak grass. Now, there's only going to be one of these in this family. Blue oak grass is kind of by itself in the categories and the genus. Now notice in this the pictures here, there's a little bit of tan inside the blue. So this is one of those evergreen grasses. The seed heads come on and those seed heads are going to be just dead vegetative growth. So in the winter, you can leave this and it's still blue. It has blue in it. So to clean it up, that's where you take a stiff rake or something and rake through it and pull a lot of that brown foliage out of it. And then the seed heads can easily break off when you're raking through it. But the plant itself stays evergreen. It doesn't, this is one that does not need to be cut to the ground. And it looks great. It has a nice rounded shape to it. You can trim up the ends. If the ends start to look a little brown, you can cut about a third of the foliage off of it. Kind of like mowing your lawn. It'll keep growing. You know, the grass isn't going to die by cutting it. And even if you cut it a little harder, it'll continue to grow. It just doesn't need it. But with the seed heads on these, they can be about 4 feet tall. The foliage itself, I would say 3 to 4 feet tall. The foliage itself is usually about 1 foot to 18 inches tall. We've got several of these throughout the garden. They look, this is a nice grass. As far as the blue grass, the blue colored grasses that are decorative, this is one of my favorites. I like this one a lot more than I like the blue fescues. So moving on to big blue stem, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce the botanical names, and then you'll just hear me slaughter these botanical Latin names. This is one that's fairly common, but not, I don't know, maybe it's not as common as I think. We've got them here in the garden, but this is a common grass in the tall prairies. Blue, kind of green to silvery blue, foliage 4 feet to 7 feet, although here in our climate, you're probably looking more at like a 4 feet. And it's well-drained soil, some 4 to 10. It's a nice option, big blue stem. And then there's a little blue stem. Now the two pictures here look very different. Now one of these little blue stem, they're just different cultivations. The one on the bottom is the blues. The other one, I'm not sure what cultivation it is. There's also a difference on water requirements here. The one that looks in the rocks, that one doesn't get any extra water. The one in the bark, that's being supplementally watered. So you can kind of tell the grasses will live, but they do look a little different when treated a little different. So little blue stem can be green to purplish, hardy, very hardy, very drought tolerant. We have kind of some masses of these in front of our building, and when they're together, the way they move and the wind and stuff, they're not very tall, 2.5, 3 feet tall. It says 1 to 4 feet. I don't think I've seen them 4 feet tall here in our garden at all. They just look really nice, very soft textured as opposed to some of the others. The blades are soft, the seed heads are soft. A nice grass for a landscape plant. Here's another one, same thing, the blue stem. Here you can see it with Russian sage on the bottom. Just anyway, a pretty decent grass. Not nearly as formal. Notice how some of it kind of droops a little, and it's not really stiff. That's the thing. It's a soft textured grass. So if you stepped on it accidentally and mashed it flat, it's going to stay flat because it's been flattened. So you know it's not fragile by any means, but it's not really, really tough. The Miscanthus grasses have big old thick stems. You know, you're going to need pruners to cut those things in the fall. These you don't. They're softer texture, smaller stems, but a nice grass. So Ravenna grass, Erianthus, this is the large end of the grasses. We've got some of these. If you want to see what these things are and do, come visit the garden right now. You'll see them. The seed heads are just coming on, not quite even there yet, but without the seed heads, these can be 4 to 6 feet tall, maybe even a little taller than that. With the seed heads, the spike that comes out of there, it adds another 6 feet of growth easy. So we've had these at 12 to 14 feet tall. here in our garden. They're tough, they're stiff, very nice flowery seed head, and so they look good through the winter. The snow typically doesn't flatten these, although we can get some heavy snows here early or late spring that will flatten them, at least break the seed heads down, maybe not flatten the whole clump. But they can be used for dried arrangements or different things like that. But if you're looking for a very large grass, this would be the one you want to use. Now, I will warn you that if you use these, the clump continues to get big. Like we've got clumps of this that are about 3 feet in diameter now. To divide this, it's not as easy as getting your shovel out and digging it up. These are, because they're so massive and the stems are so thick, you pretty much have to take like a pickaxe to them to chop them up, or if you have some other equipment like a backhoe, you could dig out the whole clump and then chop it up. But this is not an easy, just take out your shovel and in 2 minutes you got the clump dug up to chop it up. This would be more work to divide once you get to the division point of these. Here's another picture of verbenna grass, but notice the seed heads on these, really nice, very attractive, flowery, I don't know if it's flowery is the right word, just very nice, attractive seed head on these, even though the grass is really large. Some people will try to grow pampas grass here. Pampas grass is marginally hardy, depending if you got it on the south side of a building or something like that, because of the really floofy, showy seed heads on them. This is an alternative to pampas grass, not quite as attractive maybe, but definitely more hardy and tolerant of so many more conditions than you'd ever get from a pampas grass. Moving on to Great Basin wild rye. Now this is a native grass to the Great Basin area. One of the things that you hear about in history is that this is the tall grass that was growing in these valleys when settlers came, when the trappers were around, and they would talk about grass that was up to the belly of the horse. This is the Great Basin wild rye, and it used to be very common all throughout the valleys of the Great Basin. And it's still around. It's a native grass. It's used and it's still around, just not very common. But you can find it. It's a tall grass, kind of a wheat-like head on it when it actually goes to seed. But definitely low water, lots of tolerance of various soil types and range of conditions, because it grows here natively. It was here when the settlers and trappers and so forth were coming to these valleys. So a good choice for a good low water plant. Not maybe nearly as showy as some of the other options with switch grasses and Miscanthus grasses, but definitely a good option. Here's another one of Great Basin wild rye, kind of towards the end of season when it's dying back in the fall, but it's got a broad leaf on it. Nice looking grass. Mexican feathergrass, completely different genus again, very fine texture, and I don't know what else to describe this as, but it will kind of just stay like you see these pictures. It doesn't get real big, the clumps don't grow super aggressively. Even the seed head's not really showy, super showy, but the foliage itself kind of turns the brown, so you get the brown and the green together, and I mean they're an interesting look. I like the look. They're just, it's just a different look. So if this is kind of something that appeals to you, but it is a soft textured grass, so it looks nice. It's a fun thing in a landscape, just because the different movements it creates, the different look it creates in contrast with other perennial material, other shrubs and so forth. Alkali saskatoon grass. This is really, I like this grass because it's not, I don't know, I lose some of my great descriptive terms here, but notice the nice color. It's a bright green. It just kind of mounds, and then the seed heads, they're not super spectacular or anything, but just the grass itself, the coloring of it, it's such a bright green and soft texture that it doesn't need a showy seed head. It just kind of the contrasting of the colors with, if you have bark on the ground or other perennial flowering things around it, just a really nice addition just for that color that you get from the foliage. Here's alkali saskatoon grass going to seed, very fine seed head. That the picture, the lighting on that, they're not nearly as bright green in this picture. But anyway, northern sea oats grass. Here's one with an interesting seed head. The seed head almost looks like a little rattle end of a rattlesnake or something. But very wide textured grass, not super tall, but that it's grown pretty much shows very unique seed heads that just kind of hang over, they droop down. So if you're looking for something unique, more of a specimen thing, you might choose a few grasses like this, northern sea oats or the alkali saskatoon or something of that nature, just because it just kind of stands out as this unique thing. We'll talk about some blue fescues now. Festuca is the family name. Blue fescues are going to be your really short grasses that you see. If they're really, the blues on these, now there's several different cultivations and varieties, but lots and lots of, I should say there's just a range of blue colors. Some of them very intensely blue, but they're short. And then the little seed heads, the seed heads aren't super showy by any means. They're grown because just the foliage color on these can be very, very blue, gray blue, but it's nonetheless very blue. And they're evergreen, so they stay blue like that all the time, and you just rake through them. No need to cut them all to the ground. So they're used in kind of mass plantings a lot in various settings, commercial settings in different places. But this particular one is Siskiyou blue fescue is the variety cultivation. Here's some different fescues. Idaho blue fescue, a little bit bigger, but you can see kind of, again, mass planted in there. We had years, we have and have had and still have, voles will tend to go after the roots of these types of grasses occasionally. So if you have a problem with voles and you start to see your grasses dying or chunks of them missing or something, look for little holes and little burrows of voles, because they're known to eat the roots of these and kill them. So I think with that, I wanted to show you some generalized pictures. Now notice just the grasses in different settings. So with evergreens, with flowering perennials, just notice kind of how the contrasting textures and colors, to me, it looks really good. They're low water, they're low maintenance, and it just goes with so many things. You know, the grasses with the seed heads intermixed, we're here with black-eyed Susan. Foreground, you got a hyssop. There's some blades of grass of the red switchgrass in there. They just add an interesting texture and color that you really can't get from any other plant. Now there's a lot going on in this picture, but just notice in the foreground, in the gravel area, the different grasses. This is kind of an earlier summer, you know, there's still some spring blooming shrubs. This is probably like a late May, June picture. This picture in the background there, the Ravenna grass, when it's just growing, just a mounded foliage. Here you got, these are probably the avalanche or Carl Forest, or one of those anyway. Like I said, hard to tell the difference from a picture. But again, very nice contrast of color with perennial material. Perennials and shrubs, they just go. They kind of help a perennial style landscape just have that extra element of interest. Here's a later fall. You can see the grasses throughout here, again with evergreens, with asters, with the fall coloring of leaves. Grasses can just make a really nice addition, nice texture, color, and even some habitat. Like I said, birds will take the foliage and materials and stuff and use it for nesting. Not a lot of other animals are going to come and eat them or do anything with them. So in your spring cleanup or fall cleanup, whenever you do that, you will have some biomass, so to speak, that you'll have to dispose of. You can shred that all up and turn it into mulch. You can compost it. You could, you know, take it to the green waste at the landfill. So there is some mass to clean up as opposed to, you know, some other types of plants. But usually you have other material anyway that you're cleaning up, and these are a relatively easy cleanup. If you have an electric or gas hedge trimmer on the big ones, that's what we use. And just go right as close to the ground as you can go and just saw right through them. You can do them with hand loppers, hand pruners. Hand pruners that are just the little pruners are really difficult on these, the big grasses, because the stalks can be 1/2 inch in diameter and kind of just really tough. If you haven't been to our garden, I would invite you to come and check out some of the grasses. Now, we're to the point, our grasses, maybe some of them should have been divided a couple years ago. And so this fall, we're planning to do some divisions and divide divide some of these, move them around. The centers are starting to die out on some of the big grasses. So we've got some work to do to improve, but we've got one little section of our garden that's just got a lot of grasses all concentrated together. This picture actually kind of shows the walkway that goes through the area with a lot of grasses in it. It's very attractive. Again, just a few more pictures of these grasses. This picture has the grasses kind of, if you look to the distance on the other side of raised beds, the tops of the avalanche and Eldorado grasses. I hope this kind of gives you some level of understanding and kind of an interest level. You know, I think they just provide so much diversity and interest into a landscape. You wouldn't necessarily want just grasses, because you know that just in one thing by itself it gets kind of boring. But when you have your trees and your shrubs and your different color and textures and perennials all mixed in there with some grasses, I just think it completes your landscape, especially those that have been looking at other things that we're doing, where we talk about local scapes and how to achieve interest and low water and all these things combined. Grasses help accomplish all of those goals. You know, they go great with the coloring in the fall. Fall is just an awesome time of year anyway, and the grasses just kind of add that extra element, because a lot of your perennial flowering things, a lot of those are kind of finishing up. There's some really nice ones for fall, but the grasses really just top it off. And then I've got just a couple winter shots in here. This is blue oak grass in the winter. Notice the seed heads are kind of broken down, but if we scrape back that snow, there'd be some actual color in the foliage still. And here's the one picture of the purple fountain grass that I mentioned. Notice it's in a pot. For our climate, purple fountain grass has to be in a container, or I mean, it can be in the ground, but it's not going to overwinter. So with that, I think I've got some questions. I think Janice has been addressing lots of questions. But Janice, feel free to jump in here anytime if there's some specifics. But
okay, there were just two that I didn't know the answer to, and Anne, you might need to specify which slide. I wasn't paying very good attention, and I don't know which red she's talking about.
Oh, because I was going fast, and so which slide? Yeah. Okay.
It was near the end.
Yeah. Let me address this question from Kira. Is there an ornamental grass that looks similar to pampas or Ravenna grass that isn't so sharp? I love the way they look, but worry about the safety of the kids and animals. No, the Korean feather reed grass isn't nearly as sharp. It doesn't have the bigger, fluffier seed heads, but it has a nice look. But if you're actually looking for something like Ravenna grass, they're really, I know Ravenna grass, the blades, where you can feel like you got paper cuts on your something like that. So I don't know, I guess into stuff all the time. They might get a little itchy, and if they have allergies to certain things, they could get some hives and different things like that. I've never really thought about that too much with my big grasses. I don't have Ravenna grass at home, but like the zebra grass and some of those, even those can kind of cut you a little bit if you're in there, like, you know, a little bit. They're not super sharp or anything, but my kids don't get in them. They're just there and they look good. But anyway, I hope that answers your questions. Your question on that one. I don't have a good alternative for you for that. If you need a follow-up though, if you have a follow-up question to that, then please ask. So for Anne, the red in the slide, 4 to 5 slides back, an orange clump. Let's see, 4 to 5 slides back, an orange clumps. Let me go back just a minute, and we'll see. Maybe this one, the red. There's some switch grasses that kind of have the red tint to them. This one, those are actually the yellow. The yellow's kind of, those are daylilies in the fall. Let's see. The ones in this picture that have color, which I probably what you're referring to. These are switchgrasses. And so the switchgrasses do actually have a little bit more color to them as fall comes on. Some of that could be the coloring of the image here, because they're not, I wouldn't say they're vibrant colors like you get with some of the maple coloring and some of that in the fall. But if you're looking for a little bit more fall color, the switchgrasses will give you a little more fall color than the Miscanthus. Miscanthus kind of just tends to go brown. The others will kind of get a little bit of fall color and then go brown, as far as switchgrasses go. I think if that's the slide you're talking about, that's the switchgrass. So, okay, she said that's what it is. So, which oat grass are green in the winter? Blue oat grass. That's the only one I had in the presentation. It's blue oat grass. I would don't know that. I mean, they're green in the winter, but they're technically blue-green in the winter. That's the only one that I'm familiar. There's probably a couple others. Now, the things I put in the presentation here are in no means everything that's available. They're the horticulture and plant propagation industry and so forth. They are coming up with new varieties and new cultivations of plants every single year. So, go to the nursery. Sometimes even if you have no intention of buying anything, sometimes it's just fun to go to the nursery, walk around a little bit, and just see what new things, new cultivations are available, new plants. Sometimes nurseries will continue to carry the same thing that you've seen for 20